Welcome to This Week with EdSurge for the week of June 24. I'm Ira Apfel, Editorial Director here at EdSurge. This week, we're looking at two moments where teachers had to figure out who's actually in charge, technology or teacher. Today, we have a teacher who noticed colleagues were learning how to teach from an unlikely place, TikTok. And she recognized this not as a problem to fix, but rather as a signal she needed to pay attention to. Then we'll meet a high school engineering teacher who built his own AI grading tool, watched it work better than expected, and then turned off its most powerful feature. First up, Evie Wusk teaches pre-service teachers. Something her students kept doing during final exams this semester made her rethink how future teachers are actually learning. Her students kept showing up with ideas they learned from TikTok, not from peer-reviewed research, not from the course textbook. Instead, it's from other teachers posting about their day, from influencers who used to be in classrooms but aren't anymore. She wrote a piece for EdSurge called What TikTok is Teaching Future Teachers That We Aren't. And her take isn't what you might expect. She's not telling us to ban the feeds. She's asking, what if this is how knowledge actually moves now? And what happens if teacher prep programs are the last ones to know it? Evie, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So my first question to you is, you opened the article with a big word, epistemology, how we know what we know. And then you ground it with something very concrete, something your students were doing during final exams. Tell us about what you started to notice.
The exams that I do in this class are not a traditional test. I'm actually sitting one-on-one with students while they talk through a physical thing they created, doodle notes from the whole year. And in those one-on-one conversations, one after another, they kept saying things like, oh, this person I follow, or this reel. And then they were apologizing for it, but it was really connected to course content. So it made me start thinking about that big $10 word I learned in grad school about how are we knowing what we know about teaching right now, and how are they as they enter the profession. And some of those voices in their TikTok reels are encouraging, are spot on, are awesome. But some of them are just saying things like, I got out of teaching and you should too. So it just got me thinking about how these sometimes young people, sometimes people going back to teach, how their schema is getting woven together. Is it the book? It's the text. It's the teachers they know. But more often than not, it's their social media.
You describe students almost apologizing when they bring up something they learned from a TikTok or a reel, like they were embarrassed or that it somehow doesn't count. What do you think's behind that? Why do you think they feel like they have to qualify like that?
Maybe the same reason I would if I were going to bring it up in a faculty meeting. I had a teacher when I was going through undergrad who said, if you're teaching with the internet, you're no longer the smartest person in the room. And that really stuck with me, that the expertise is a lot more decolonized or spread out among the masses. And that was kind of what got me thinking about this. How do they know what they know? I think about it like a weed maybe growing up a wall, or like some ivy, where we didn't maybe plan for this, for how our house looks, but it's like, it's there. At what point do we just embrace it and go, hey, this is part of the facade and let's trim around it and just have a new look? So whether we acknowledge it or not, these TikTok or social media voices are in young teachers' heads. It's how they're connecting the dots. So I guess my article, I was more saying, hey, what if I lean into this? What are some things that I could do to embrace this? Because it's good and it's bad. It's not all one thing or the other.
What are your peers saying?
Well, it's kind of like asking, what are all your seventh graders like? Humans are varied. I have faculty who are curious and excited about this. I also have people who maybe see that as secondary, and in some ways it is, if we're talking about causal research. I mean, we don't have large numbers. I'm a teacher researcher. I love a narrative. I think the person living it, experiencing it, actually gives them credibility. So I think it's interesting to talk to people who are teaching or listen to people who are teaching right now. They're doing it. And so maybe they don't have a research-based best practice, but they do have a trick that worked with Johnny in second period. And that's a way of knowing that I think holds value instead of just saying, is it this or this? Yes, like maybe it's both and just get curious in that space.
You make a distinction between information that's democratizing and information that could also be destabilizing for early career teachers. Can you say more about the tension and how to maybe find some balance?
The tension is creative. Anytime there is tension between two things, it's like a rubber band that's pulled tight and there's a lot of energy there. And so I think part of what relieves that tension could be like a flamingo stance, if you go with me. This is kind of how I think about AI right now. I've intentionally got one foot in the mix. I'm thinking about it. I'm curious about it. I'm trying it out. And I also have one foot pulled back. Like I'm intentionally going to have some moments in my day and my week where I'm not doing that, where I am being quiet, where I can hear my own self think. And I think that same stance is what we could take toward this. Let's have one foot firmly in the research, firmly in we know what we're doing, we're finding trusted resources. But then let's also have that other foot pulled over here because that vine I talked about is up. It's growing up the wall. It's happening whether we embrace it or not. So can we be both and about it? Because it's not just talking about teacher ed. It's teaching is good teaching is good teaching.
You do some good practical ideas in the piece, things like Ed Content Fridays and having students create their own short form content. What does it actually look like when someone does that in the class?
In another one of my classes, I changed the final so they could write a paper or they could make a short form video. And the short form videos that they made were interesting and cool. A couple of them made me cry. And I saw it as a way of valuing that literacy. Some of them are already making content. I like the idea of let's take this part of your life and put your teacher brain on it and add some real citations. So you're not just adding to the Italian brain rot scroll fest, but you're adding some content that's rich that you're proud to share.
Teacher prep programs are built around research and structured curriculum, but you're essentially saying that the way students are actually forming knowledge doesn't match how you're training them to teach. So, what would it look like to actually close that gap?
It's just, can we be curious? Can we ask questions? I'm much more interested in a classroom where the things the students know, the questions they have, that there's a space for that. If I'm just standing up and if the arrow is always pointing at them saying, here, I'm going to fill your empty receptacle brain, we're missing all this other content they can have when they talk to each other, when they ask real questions. And I just think it makes the classroom a lot more alive. And so they can make those connections from the real world to the text, which that's nothing new. I'm just saying, can we also tie in the social media stuff and maybe give it value in our classrooms because the students are spending a lot of time there. Just curious how that time could be geared toward professional growth and following folks that are posting content that's rich and interesting in amidst the folks who are saying, quit teaching, this profession is too hard, get out while you can, because those voices are in there.
Do you foresee a day when traditional research and structured curriculum for teaching educators combines TikTok and other social media content? Or do you think it's more of a passing fad and something completely different will take over down the road?
Ira, your guess is as good as mine. I mean, young people today, they're not like I was in college where we were all listening to the same music. Now there's so much more, at least I see such a diversity of interests, of things that they're into, of ways they're engaging the world. There's movements like like New Luddites, where they're saying, we don't want any technology. We're going to have a Motorola flip phone and move the center of our life from online to the quote unquote real world. And then there are also students who are diving headfirst into AI everything. So we could say, oh my gosh, this is so hard, like a lot of teachers do when their classroom is, I've got students who can read and I've got students who can't read. But there's a lot of richness in that diversity, and there is a curiosity.
So I'm curious how you came to all this, Evie. Are you just someone who just loves being online in your private time and this kind of spilled over? Or did you see a need to do it because you've seen your students getting into this and you thought, boy, I need to keep up with the pace?
So my background at first was as a middle school English teacher, and I spent a lot of time with middle schoolers. And one of the things you learn early on is they have like, are you being real with us detectors? And so that was sort of a baptism by fire, that I could not just come in and pretend. That middle schoolers are amazing and awesome. And they also kind of sit back and they're like, make me. So you have to be engaged with them for real. And I think that's followed me into the classroom. I also have 2 middle school children who I like to sit by them and say, what you doing? My daughter is going to be a freshman in high school. Her way of being friends, making friends, and as much as I kind of hate it because I want her to have the farm girl summer I had as a kid, part of her ways of being and her identity are wrapped up in Snapchat. I've been lucky to be around a lot of wise people and educators who are curious about what's really going on. And also I'm kind of a middle schooler at heart, so I just like asking the silly question, or when a student walks in, I'm like, oh, sweet. I love your high tops. Tell me about that. And I've always been a naturally curious person, for good and for ill. I just like learning. And that doesn't stop with my students. I like learning about them. And I think that helps me to see into their world a little bit. And so part of the work I do is to try to get these young people, these college students, to buy into this rich history of educational research that we have. There's a lot of things we know about how people learn. Like one example I always start with is there's just research that says choice is motivating. So if I say to my son in the morning, get dressed, I get a lot worse results than if I say, hey, do you want to wear this sweatshirt or this sweatshirt? And you can use that across all kinds of educational contexts. So we got to be plugged into what's going on with the students, and also holding in this hand everything we have in our rich history of educational research, because those two things have a lot to say to each other, and it's not just bad, it's exciting.
Eddie, thanks for making us think differently about where future teachers are actually learning. We'll link to your piece in the show notes. Thanks for being on the podcast today.
Thank you, Ira. This has been great.
Our next guest is a high school engineering teacher who went looking for a time-saving solution and ended up somewhere he didn't expect. And it all started with a student saying some surprising words. Thank you. Stephen Swanson teaches high school mechatronics, this interesting place where engineering, electronics, and computer science all collide. And after chaperoning 2 days of field trips back-to-back, he came back to 450 ungraded assignments. So he did what any good engineer does. He built a tool to solve the problem. He created an AI grading assistant. It could draft grades and comments against his rubrics and send them directly to students, all without him clicking anything. He recently wrote a piece in EdSurge called, I Built an AI Grading Tool, then a student thanked me for words I didn't write. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So, first question, walk us through that moment. A student came up happy about feedback on his work. What did that feel like when you realized not only did you not write it, but you hadn't even seen it?
There's probably 2 feelings. There's the one, hey, I built something that's actually helping somebody. So there's that initial like, oh, wow, okay, so it's actually working. And then there's the second later where I go, what did it say? And I wish I would have built it differently. And that's when I kind of went back to the drawing board and started looking at things and making sure there was like a review process. So it was a torn feeling, and it was a little bit of both.
You write that the feedback wasn't entirely inaccurate, and that's what made it harder to explain what felt wrong about it. So where did you land on what was wrong about it?
It was actually hard to pinpoint. In the end, you could just have that gut feeling where you just go, okay, I need to redo this. But there definitely was nothing wrong about the comment. It was, in fact, they were really, like I said, happy to see it, and it was 100% accurate. And I thought I need to make it where I see them all before they go back out. This obviously happened after I built a long trust with it because I had built it over the course of years, perfecting it, but I didn't foresee a situation like that at the moment. So that's why I went back and rebuilt it.
So you remove the auto return feature on your AI tool and you replace it with a review dashboard, which means now you still see every grade and comment before a student does. How well does the tool work for you now, and what impact has it had on your day-to-day work?
Well, it makes it much more efficient. It's not as fast as it was before, because before I could literally click a button and walk away instantaneously. It was all of 5 seconds. Now it takes a few more minutes. It'll process everything. It lays everything in front of me. Anything doesn't look right, I can look at comments, add to the comments, delete the comment out completely. I can uncheck the student and say, you know what, I'm going to grade this one manually, and just kind of uncheck it and say, when everything gets returned back, this one's not going to get returned back, and I'll just go back to Google Classroom and I'll find it there ungraded and untouched. So it's the same, but just more efficient.
You make a point in the article that students will challenge an AI grade way faster than they'll challenge you directly. A kid is going to walk right up to you and say, the AI got this wrong. Why do you think that is? Why does that matter for other teachers thinking of drafting their own tools like this?
I've always encouraged students, hey, if there's something wrong, you reach out to me. Don't always advocate for yourselves. I'm 100% on that. It doesn't matter what it is, or if you think it's right or it's wrong. I'll never fault you for, even when you were in the wrong and I was in the right. I would never do that to you. I'll just kind of point out why I gave you the grade, and that's the way it is. But I know there's a lot of students out there that just don't do it, and it's just their personality. I did notice that students would come up a little bit more often, and it's not because it's getting wrong more often, but I can tell they're building that courage. There's students who normally don't come up to me and talk to me, but they're more than glad to tell me that, hey, this AI, it only gave me 8 out of 10, but it didn't see the last sentence because it got cut off or something like that. And it makes sense to me as well. Like, hey, I'm not telling you, teacher, that you're not good enough, that you're making mistakes. I'm saying something else is. I think that it's just like lowers a wall of sorts, so that students can kind of come up to you a little bit easier. I don't know how much. I don't have any data on that, but I can definitely sense that from the students.
So were you transparent with your students about using this AI tool? How did all that work?
When I first came out with it, I actually was just toying with it on the side as practice, but not really using it in a full automated way. As I started coming up with Class Lens, which is the actual website, I actually showed it to one of my administrators. He was a principal of mine. He's now at the district. And I said, what do you think of this? And he said he could definitely see a lot of the potential and stuff. But one of the things he did bring up was, hey, I think if we ever implement something like this, 2 things that he said that was very important. And one of them was, we need to make sure that we're transparent. In other words, parents, students, they know that some sort of AI grading assistant is being used in your class. And the other thing was that they can challenge it, like the grade, and that a teacher would go back and look at it manually.
A lot of teachers are probably listening to this and they're feeling pressure to use AI in all sorts of ways at work. And you actually built something that seems to have saved a lot of time, and then you pulled it back. So for the teacher out there who's looking at a stack of 200 assignments and thinking, I just need this to go away, I need my own grading tool, what would you tell them?
When I first did it, I literally graded them a little bit more than I usually do. Like I gave them extra attention to make sure I was looking at each one thoroughly. Then I ran it through a grading program. I used other ones at first that weren't working, and that's why I built one. Otherwise, I would just use whatever was out there. And what I would recommend is that they look at it and go, how close is my assignment's grade to what this AI or whatever you're using, whatever tool, whether it be AI or not, how close is it? And you need to know that, because if it doesn't feel right when you're doing it, no matter what settings you do, then obviously it's probably not a good tool.
For you, when is it acceptable to use AI for grading? Are there specific assignments that you would or would not want to use it for?
I think the biggest focus point for these are these high volume, low stakes assignments. So that's assignments like, hey, I give these assignments out for students to write down these notes every day at home. And if you are a teacher and you tend to do that and you're just giving credit or not credit, I think this is the best point where it's a win-win for everybody. Because if you're just giving credit or not credit, there is some value in that, obviously, because, hey, you know what, they're practicing, right? But if they're practicing it wrong, who's validating that? You were just checking to see if they did it, not if they did it right. And also students may learn, hey, I'm not accountable for this. All I'm accountable is turning on a piece of paper with something on it. And so if the student feels that, then they're not going to give it the effort. The other one, I think, is that they probably should not be using it on maybe personal things. And what I mean by that is if you can get a personal story from the student, something where you get to learn who that student is, that's probably not the best place to use it because you lose out on that. And that's the two concerns, to be honest with you, in AI, is I'm going to use AI to grade my stuff, but you have two big concerns, in my opinion. The one is, well, how am I going to get to know my students? And how do I know what they know and they don't know? I've solved one of them by my class lens creates a report and tells the teacher exactly what they did and didn't know overall after it grades an assignment. That solves the, like, how do I know what they didn't know? What is my class lacking kind of thing. But the other one, learning who your student is. I think there's certain assignments like, an all about me assignment or tell me a story from your life assignment. Let me give you an example. I graded resumes and this is when class lens transitioned from more of a scrapped like thing running on my computer to like more of a website. And I wanted to test it a little bit. So I was grading these resumes, and that is definitely an assignment I think you should always grade by hand. However, I thought, well, I wonder how good also, since I sat here and graded all of them, how good does this AI grade? Does it grade like I would have? So I had it grade. I remember one student, she's one of my top students. When I got to that assignment, I looked at it and I said, oh, this is going to be a good one because she's one of the top students in the class. And sure enough, it was a beautifully well-formatted resume. I glanced at it, read the first couple things. Her GPA was 4.3 something and gave her 10 out of 10 points. And then I went along and did everybody's in the class. When I had the AI grade it, I looked through every single one, kind of glancing down each one. And then I saw hers with a 9 out of 10. I said, okay, well, obviously the AI is not grading correctly. And I read the comment. It said, hey, so-and-so, your resume looks great. The only thing is pay attention to the spelling. You misspelled the word present 6 times. And I went, did she really? And I looked back and sure enough, my eye just didn't see it. This is one of those scenarios where, is this a thing? Is this a perfect time to grade for AI? No, because I want to learn about the student. But at the same time, it's also a great time to grade with AI because it will find any little things on these. And these are resumes these kids will turn in. And this girl gets a 10 out of 10 is going to turn that into a job and say, well, I already had my teacher look over this. He's the one that signed this. He said, this is a perfect resume. So I'm going to turn it in just as is. But it caught the error. I didn't. And so I think that was a good benefit of when you shouldn't use it, but not as a sole grading. In other words, you learn about your student, but then also use it to double check because this was kind of a high stakes for them, right? A resume. So I thought it was kind of a good in between where it's a little bit of both.
Stephen, thanks for this. There's no shortage of AI success stories out there, but teachers who are willing to share what didn't work and what they did about it are what educators need to hear more about right now. So thanks for coming on the show.
Appreciate it. Thanks again for having me.
Here's what stuck with me from both conversations today. Evie Wusk is watching future teachers absorb ideas from TikTok and asking whether that's something to fight or embrace. Her answer is pretty clear. If the information is already there and already shaping how they think, you might as well help them think about it critically. Stephen Swanson built a tool that worked exactly as designed and then had to ask whether he had the right goal. His answer was to put himself back in the loop, not because the AI was wrong, but because the grade still needs to belong to someone. The thread running between them, technology moves fast, but the judgment, the relationship, the accountability, those still belong to the teacher. These are exactly the conversations we'll be continuing in person next week at ISTE Live 26 in Orlando, Florida, including all the harder questions about AI, teacher judgment, and what we're actually trying to protect when we talk about keeping humans in the loop. Details and registration are linked in the show notes. Hope to see you there. That's it for this week with EdSurge. Thanks to Evie Wusk and Stephen Swanson for joining us, and thanks to all of you for listening. For the EdSurge team, I'm Ira Apfel. We'll be back in your feed next week.